This week we'll see an interview by Frank Fluckiger with Shaun McCausland. Some of you may remember Shaun from earlier episodes. Shaun is a prominent candidate for the U.S. House in Utah's 2nd Congressional District.
Shaun, as National Chairman, I'm pleased to know that you're running for the U.S. Congressional race in Utah District 2 in Utah. Can you tell us a little bit about that campaign?
Yeah, the 2nd District in Utah comprises, of course, about a fourth of the state. A lot of rural area, but we do have the west side of Salt Lake County, Tooele County, up into Bountiful a little bit. There's quite a broad range of interests there, but especially the rural areas, farms, ranchers, small governments, small cities, small counties. They need representation as much as the big city does, and that's one of the areas that I've spent some time learning about.
So can you tell us a little bit about your past political activity and what brought you to the Constitution Party?
You bet. I was very active in the Republican Party for many, many years, state delegate, county delegate, precinct chairman, that type of thing. But a few years back, it's been about a dozen years or so, I realized that the Republicans were spending money as fast as everybody else was, that they were not as concerned about our individual liberties as they were about keeping their jobs, and got pretty fed up with it and decided it was time to go to a party where I could tell the truth. Nobody would give me trouble for doing so, and that's what I'm doing now.
So how was it that you found out about the Constitution Party, and when was that?
About 14 years ago, I started looking around a little bit because I realized I was pretty fed up with both of the major parties. And I looked into the Libertarians, I looked into others, found that the Constitution Party reflected the values I believed, which is less government, more limited government, but it also contains and keeps that moral quality that I think is important as part of our public discourse and as a part of a party. We don't try to create or make laws to enforce a moral or religious type of a system, but we honor and respect God, and we honor and respect moral importance in the decisions that are made in the government.
There are some issues that are related to the Utah situation. One of those was the Senate bill passed, basically stripping the power of the conventions and allowing candidate to get on the primary ballot even though he lost in the convention by getting a certain number of signatures. Could you address that a little bit? What is the motivation in your mind behind that bill?
Well, there's a couple of things that are either intended consequences or unintended consequences, both of which are really negative. The system we have with the caucuses gives you in your neighborhood a chance to make a difference in the state politics and even on the national level. If you decide you want to go participate in that caucus, either run as a delegate or send delegates that stand for the things that you believe in. As I mentioned, I was a state and county delegate for many years, and the caucus system made that possible. I was able to go and present resolutions. I was able to go and vote on things and on candidates that I believed in. And each of those people that are delegates represent up to 1,000 or 2,000 people in their district. And that can make a big difference in the way that we go forward in a party. The caucus system, I believe, is a very positive system, and I believe it is much closer to the republic form of government that we espouse, that we believe we have, although a lot of it has been destroyed, but that our founders wanted, which is the citizen being involved in the political process. And the unintended or intended consequences of this is that the major parties can actually attack each other by getting a candidate on the ballot to siphon off votes from someone they don't want to win. For example, say a Republican who's very conservative is running, and so the party wants to have someone that's less conservative to be their candidate. they can try to find somebody else that's conservative and promote them and get them on the ballot through the other processes that this law creates. And so all of a sudden the conservative part of the party is splitting their vote, and the less conservative person ends up becoming the candidate. That's the big unintended or possibly intended consequence of this new law, and I very much oppose it.
The issue that we're talking about is count my vote.
Right.
And the Constitution guarantees to each state a Republican form of government, Republican with a small r. Many see this as a way of simply destroying that system of government and destroying representative form of government and replacing it with a broad-based form of democracy. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, the thing that I see, I guess, that worries me and annoys me is that the people that have power already, the party bosses, if you will, are going to have even more are going to have even more power with this system than they have had in the past. In the past, the people of the state, if they felt they wanted someone, for example, a Mike Lee, that could stand up for the Constitution, they could make that happen. With the new system, that's much less likely, and that's the reason for this law, is because he was successful. In my opinion, that's why they came up with this.
So what are the sources of revenue coming in to support Count My Vote? It appears that it's a system whereby money is going to control the elections rather than issues controlling the election.
I think that's been true for a long time to a great extent, but issues could come to the front. With this system that we're talking about now, money becomes much more important. I've been against money in politics for all the time I've been involved with politics, but the more we take the citizen and the citizen's ideas out of the political square and make it a matter of how much money you can get, the more our people that are in politics are beholden to the people with a lot of money. And that makes those with money the only ones really making the decisions. I don't think that's a good thing for our country.
Thanks for your comments. Let's move on to another subject.
Okay.
Common Core. There's a strong element in Utah that seems to be opposed to Common Core, and yet those in power are pushing it. What are your views of Common Core? Are there favorable things or are there negatives? Could you comment on that?
By and large, the biggest effect is very negative. Any time the federal government gets involved in our children's education, we should be very, very wary and very concerned. Anytime that the funds that are used to educate our children are tied to going along with what the federal government says, I get very concerned, because our schools are already becoming a place where democracy is proposed as the fact of the matter in our political system and not a Republican form of government. They are not teaching what the founders understood in our schools. And Common Core takes us even farther away from the principles that made our country great, made us prosperous, made us a happy people and a free people. That concerns me a lot. When we become a system of government schools that basically indoctrinate our children, we're not that far from the totalitarian governments that we are so critical of.
Thank you. Another thing, there seems to be concern on a growing number of citizens about being able to control their private property, especially in rural areas. FEMA seems to be, by regulation, dictating more and more what can or cannot be done with private property, and it has an impact on the value of the owners of that property. Could you share with us any instances where you are aware of things like that happening? And as a congressman, how would you work to bring back the right to use private property back to the citizens and away from the federal government?
Well, the first thing to recognize is that the federal government really has no say constitutionally about private property. Even the income tax, which we created through an amendment, which is a legal process, attacks the basic foundation that our founders believed in, that if you create property or inherit property, that it is yours to do with as you see fit. It is not the government's to tax or to take away from you at their whim. There are very limited exceptions to that that have to do with national defense and those types of things. But what has happened is that not only the national but the local governments have gotten to the point now where they think they can take away anything if they see a better use for it. And that is very, very counter to the freedoms that we enjoyed for the first couple of 100 years that we had this country. We need to understand the sacredness of private property, and the laws that have been passed in the last 20 years are destroying that.
Another question I have, with the passage of Obamacare, many states, especially in the South, are divorcing themselves from Obamacare and refusing to add Medicaid to their system because they realize that with Medicaid, many more federal controls come into power and dictate more and more to the states who they will take care of and how it's to be done. If you were elected to Congress, how will you address that question? Your leaders of your own state seem to be promoting Medicaid. How would you convince them that they should follow the advice and example set by many states that are declining that approach?
Well, the first thing that I think everybody needs to understand, especially our state legislators, our governor, is that any time you accept anything from anybody, there are strings attached, and no more so than with the federal government. The federal government has no reason, constitutionally or morally, to be involved in health care in any way. That is a state and local decision. If the local communities want to do something, if the states want to do something, that is their right. They can choose to do that by petitioning their people and saying, we would like to create a system where the people that are the most unfortunate among us can get the care they need. All of us are going to need to contribute a little bit to do that. That's fine if a state wants to do that and can get the people to agree. But to mandate it from a federal level is totally, in my mind, against the Constitution. As a congressman, I would vote to defund all of the portions of Obamacare that violate our constitutional rights.
And what advice would you give to those now taking Obamacare who are now learning that they may be taxed on those benefits if their income level is too high, and those forms will be sent out in January before they're able to they have to be filled out before they can file, and these people, unbeknownst to them, are now going to be liable for taxable income that they had not anticipated. What advice would you give to those people?
Actually, the same advice I've been giving for the last 3 or 4 years since this became an issue. If you think that Obamacare's a good idea, wait till you get your tax bill. And this coming year is the first year that that's going to happen, where people are going to start to realize what the real cost of this Affordable Care Act, quote unquote, is actually going to create for us. It's going to cost everyone a lot more money. It's not a better system. It's a less efficient system. There is much, much more waste and a lot less care going to be available to most of the citizens of this country.
Thank you. One final question. How would you deal with the issue of illegal immigration? It's becoming a major problem in the state of Utah, and it's becoming a growing problem in many other states throughout the nation. How would you address that problem as a congressman in Washington, D.C.?
Well, there's a long answer and a short answer. I'm going to give you the short one today because of our time frame. But the first part of it is that we need to make it more possible for people to come here legally. I know people that have tried for 15 years to come here by going through all of the correct procedures and doing the things that they're supposed to do, paying all the money they're supposed to pay, and they're still not able to get into the country legally. that provides a big incentive for people to come here illegally. So we need to increase our ability to assimilate people that come here legally. But that said, we need to control our borders completely and allow no one to come here illegally. When you have people coming here in a flood, just as in a flood of water, water is a great thing and it provides lifeblood to the community. But if you have a flood, you get with it all of the things that you don't want. In this case, terrorists, criminals, rapists, murderers, and those people are actually coming a lot more than we think they are, and they're affecting our lives here in Utah, but even more so in some of the border states where crime has risen dramatically because these people are here and we don't filter them. We've got to be able to say, this is our country, we get to decide if you come here, and we get to decide if you stay. That's critical to the survival of our nation.
Thank you. As a third-party candidate, normally you are ignored by the major media. How are you dealing with that, and how are you promoting yourself in your campaign?
I think that there's a lot of things we can't do without having lots of money. You can't attack the airwaves and put an ad in every football game and that type of thing like a lot of them can do. But what we can do, and what I am doing, is I'm trying to spend a little time in each community in my district, to spend a little time there talking with the people, listening to the people, answering their questions, asking them questions, hopefully educating them a little bit on the things that really matter and why it is important to vote for a third party. There's a recent poll that said that 9% of our country is happy with the job that Congress is doing. If 91% of the people are unhappy, if 91% of the people voted for a third party, guess who would be elected? You've just got to decide that it's worth making a difference. And you can do it if you're willing to vote your conscience. That's what I am saying to people.
Shaun, thank you for your time, and the best to you in the campaign.
Thank you.